What's going on, guys? Akko here, doing my long-awaited how to play Zamasu guide. This one's been highly requested for a while, and with good reason. Zamasu is an incredibly fun character in this game with a huge toolkit. He is a character that can play offense or defense or, a hybrid in the middle. He's got so many options, and there's just so much to talk about. So let's not waste any time and get right into it. And a quick note to make before we jump into things here. This is not a combo guide. This is strictly a how to play Zamasu. We're going to be breaking down everything about the character from, his special moves to what to do at neutral, what to do on Oki, all that good stuff. So this guide will be strictly how to play, and the next guide will be how to do all of his optimal combos. So be sure to check that one out right after this one. So again, let's get right into how to play Zamasu. One of the most important aspects of any character is their buttons, and Zamasu has been blessed with some amazing buttons, most of which hit very far and have a lot of pushback, making him a stagger monster. Starting off with his 5L, it is a very good, very reliable jab. As you can see, it's got great range and very low recovery. It comes out at 6 frames, meaning it's very reliable for those moments where you feel like you want to challenge, and it's only -3, which again makes it very good for staggers. After the most recent patch, they added the fact that Zamasu can now chain this move by holding back, so much like many of the Gokus and other good stagger characters in this game, Zamasu can now stagger his light to break up his offense. Moving on to 5LL, the second part of his auto combo is a nice long-reaching button with also fairly low recovery as far as auto combos go. It's also relatively safe against reflex. However, keep in mind if your 5L hits at tip range, you will whiff the auto combo, leaving you quite unsafe to a reflect. His 5LLL, the end of his auto combo, is very famously a grab. This gives him access to tick throw setups, and you will mostly be using it in a lot of your combos. His 2L is an actual low. It's chainable, hits from very far away, has very low recovery, and is a basis for a lot of his mix-ups. 5M, possibly his most famous button. It is a lunging medium that comes out in an insanely fast 8 frames. Even from round start, it hits in 10 frames, making this a very scary button for the opponent. When playing Zamasu, you will notice that in most cases, people are not going to challenge you when the match starts because no one wants to deal with this button. However, do keep in mind that this button is unsafe. As you can see, it is -7, meaning if you stop here, there is the potential that if your opponent were to hit a button quickly enough, you will be punished. Next up is 2M, is a very long-reaching low strike. Unlike his medium, it is actually only -5, making it safe. So between the fact that it hits so far, is actually low, and is safe, this is a great way to pause your stagger pressure. If you are not sure if your opponent is going to strike or not, or if you want to restart your pressure, the 2M is a great stopping point. His 5H is a lunging kick. Pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to say about this button. Due to the strength of his lights and mediums, there's really not much reason to use this button at neutral. However, you'll be using it a lot in your combos and block strings. Next is another very famous button, his 2H. In a recent patch, they decided to make this move completely projectile invincible. This means his 2H can travel through all beams and all assists. This is by far one of his strongest defensive utilities. There are a lot of situations in the game that he simply does not have to deal with. However, there is one important factor to keep in mind. When a projectile passes through your 2H, the game treats it as nothing happened. And if nothing happens when you do your 2H, you are left extremely unsafe. The only way to get out of the animation is to vanish, which can be quite deadly. So if using his 2H is something you plan to do at neutral, make sure you get a strong defensive assist to cover you. And rounding out his grounded buttons is his 5S, a very, very reliable Ki Blast. This is one of his best neutral tools. This Ki Blast comes out incredibly fast, hits very high while still hitting crouchers, and has amazing hit stun. This button also opens up his stagger game, as the opponent has to block it now, and it has a very good amount of pushback, meaning that in a lot of situations for a lot of characters, you're going to be able to reach them before they can reach you. Next, we'll cover his jump button, starting with his jump L. This button is incredibly good at tagging super dashes. And when your opponent is grounded, it works great as a mix-up tool. For when you use it in an IED, you can always get 2 jabs even on short opponents, meaning that you can mix up between 2 or 1, keep your opponent on their toes. And on top of all that, it's also his best cross-up button. J5M is a solid air poke. This is good when used for air-to-air situations or when you're trying to staircase your opponent. It's also your premier IED button outside of JL, because in most cases, as long as your opponent is not too short, you can get an M and an L, giving you an extra little overhead option that you can fake or add into your mix-ups. J5H is quite standard. It's just your natural everyday jumping heavy. It's got a decent range and of course good scaling if you actually manage to hit it. In most cases, you're just going to be using this either for your IADs if you're choosing the slower option, or you're going to be using it in combos. His Air 2H is anything but standard. This one is unique to certain characters in the game. This is one of those 2Hs that does not send the opponent up for a combo. Instead, it sends them into the ground for a slide knockdown. J2H does have one more use where you can sometimes sneak it in as a sneaky double overhead. But keep in mind that you cannot combo off of it, even on hit. His Jump S is a pretty well-known move. It shoots 3 Ki Blasts, depending on how long you hold the button. You can shoot from 1 to 3, depending on how long you hold it. It is very fast and hits a great angle. Like most of the action in this game on the ground is going to happen at the angle this covers, so it makes it great for sniping out opponents and tagging, whiffed buttons or whiffed beams. However, I would advise using this button sparingly. A lot of characters with angled Ki Blasts like this have some sort of invincible move to fall back on in case the opponent actually takes the bait. In most cases, Zamasu does not. So if you go for this and your opponent actually calls your bluff, you have no way of defending yourself in most situations other than a vanish. Now it's time to talk about Zamasu's special moves. We're going to go ahead and start with Divine Order, also known as his 236S. This move has 2 different variations. It has the non-charged and the charged. Each one has their own uses, so let's go ahead and go over that. The regular non-charged version, you will not be using at neutral that often, as it doesn't have that many neutral applications. However, it is very important to Zamasu's combo game. In the corner, it gives you a wall bounce that will be used in most of your B&Bs. In a combo where you would usually use a 2H with another character, with Zamasu you use the 236S. That gives you your wall bounce, and then you follow it up with one of his other special moves that we'll go over later, his Slicer. The charge version, however, is a bit different in the fact that it is a beam attack and will be used in most aspects of his game. It's very strong at neutral. As you can see, it comes out relatively quickly, so this makes for a very strong neutral tool. This attack actually has 2 parts to it. It has the initial slash and the follow-up, so when you use it on a person's block, it leaves it with very low recovery. You can see it's only -3 and pushes back, which makes it great for ending your staggers. This move has a very high arc, so it's good at hitting opponents out of the air, but just keep in mind that if it misses, you are extremely unsafe. Of course, you can't talk about Zamasu without mentioning his trademark flight mode. However, his flight mode is so deep that I want to talk about it in its own section. So we'll go over the details of how to use it and what it actually does a little bit later. I just wanted to mention it here because coming up, all of his moves will lead into flight mode. So once we tackle all of those, we'll go into more details on how to actually utilize his flight. Now it's time to go over his slicers with the 2, 3, 6, L, M, and H. Starting with the light version is very fast and very safe. Keep in mind, however, this move has a very awkward hit reaction. It makes it quite difficult to combo it into an assist at neutral. But one of its biggest strengths is that you can cancel it into flight mode even on whiff. So even if you connect with nothing, as long as you hold the S button, you can go into flight. And this functions as a very quick way of getting into flight mode. Of course, you can also flight cancel on block. However, keep in mind that flight canceling the light version is -5 and it leaves you very close to the opponent. So you're going to want to cover this with an assist, or else you could get punished or pressured in most situations. The medium version is a bit slower, but has a lot more range. It hits nearly full screen, and just like the light version, you can cancel it into flight mode even on whiff. In most cases, this is the version you'll be using to poke with a neutral since it hits from so far away. And not only that, as you can see, once it's been blocked, Zamasu actually moves backwards when he transitions into flight. So even though you're negative, it moves you so far away that in most cases it'll be hard for the opponent to do anything about that, especially if you hit from hip range or from just outside their range. But keep in mind that this move is an instant slide knockdown move, so in most cases you cannot combo this into an assist or follow up in any way once it actually hits. You can vanish, however, if you react fast enough, but keep in mind that it does take away your slide knockdown. The H version is arguably the best version of the move. It is basically a combination of the two. It has the range of the medium and it has the speed of the light version. This move comes out incredibly fast, and unlike the other two, it is actually plus on block when you transition into flight mode, making it a very, very powerful offensive tool. Also, much like the medium version, this leads to an instant knockdown. However, this is a deep knockdown designed to set you up for Hell Zone combos. And on block, you will be using it constantly if you are going for flight mix. And now it's time to get into Zamasu's more advanced special moves. We're of course going to be talking about Wall of Light, his 2-1-4. So with this move, there is a lot to talk about. This move is basically a built-in assist. Once it's been summoned, you are allowed to move freely across the screen, and depending on the strength of the button you chose is when the attack will go off. Pretty much any aspect of his kit can still be accessed while this move is charging. The only thing that will make this move go away is if you block something. However, you can counteract this by reflecting. When the move is actually blocked, it's around plus 18, 19 depending on the distance, which is very good and sets up for a lot. One of his huge buffs this season was the amount of hit stun it has. So when the opponent gets hit by this move now, you will notice that they are locked in place for a good amount of time before they actually start to flip back. This gives you a lot of time to visually confirm that it hit and go for your combo. Another huge buff he received recently is, much like his slicers, this move can transition into flight mode. All you have to do is during the input simply hold S and he will go into flight mode with the lightning on. It is incredibly strong, not to mention the fact that in the most recent patch they also reduced the recovery on this move, so you can do this move faster, recover faster, and go into flight faster, which is all just so good. So you have the option of actually flying around the screen with a threat behind you. It is incredibly strong. That's not to say it's invincible, however, as please note that the actual lightning bolts are a ki blast property, which means the opponent can super dash through it. So that does it for the general basics on the Wall of Light. Let's go ahead and talk about what each actual button does. The light version puts the lightning out for roughly 2 seconds, 2 real life seconds, and this is the one that you will be using the most. This one works incredibly well in block strings and sets up for your tick throws. This move also layers incredibly well with your slicers. Let's say you want to get in with your medium slicer, but you don't want to lose your turn. As long as you time it properly, you can set it up to where your medium slicer actually becomes plus. The medium version lasts 4 seconds long, roughly twice the amount of time as the light. Situations where you've knocked the opponent down and you want to set something up before they get up, the medium version is good because of the fact that you have a little bit of extra time to work with after your opponent actually gets up, especially if they delay their wake up. The H version is literally the light and medium combined. It shoots 2 separate lightning bolts, one at 2 seconds and one at 4 seconds. This one is almost always worth it as long as you have some meter to spend, because the amount of stagger mix-up that you do is almost limitless. And after the most recent patch, this version has the least amount of recovery, believe it or not. Now it's finally time to talk about the strongest aspect of the character, flight mode. Basically, his whole kit is designed around this mechanic. But before we get into all the things that it does, let's go ahead and break down some of the rules. You float for about 10 seconds and you are free to move in any direction. However, there is a height limit. There's a certain range of the screen you're not allowed to leave. Even if you make your way up there due to, like, you know, a 2H or, you know, a super dash gone crazy, once you fly, you're not allowed to go up past a certain distance. When you are flying, the screen will always favor Zamasu, which is a strength and a weakness, admittedly, because when you're this high off the screen, you can't actually see what your opponent is doing, but that means your opponent can't see what you're doing down there either, and down there is where your assists come from. So there are a lot of instances where if your opponent's not careful and they're trying to chase you too much, they may get tagged. Which brings me to the next point. You are allowed to call assists while you are flying, even though they won't even be visible on the screen. You are 100% allowed to call any assist. But as you can see here, make sure you keep note that any assist called during flight will not come back until your flight mode has completely ended and you touch the ground. This counts even if you go into flight after they've been called. You must touch the ground before you get them back, otherwise it would be a little bit too broken. You can also only go into flight once per jump. Once you've jumped, you can go into flight, but you cannot do it again. And it's also important to note that using flight mode does not take away your air actions afterwards. After you're done with flight mode, if you haven't used your jump, you can still use it. And if you super jump before you start the flight, you can still float afterward. Now we're gonna go ahead and talk about flight specific special moves. We're gonna start with the absolute biggest one, the game changer. It was in the Season 4 patch where they added this, Zamasu's Flight Dash. While in flight mode, all you have to do is press forward or back, and you will do his flight dash, also known as the teleport. You can also do it by pressing forward and the super dash macro if you have a super dash macro, as well as back in the super dash macro. This dash is absolutely insane. First of all, it is completely invincible from frame 1, meaning that the moment you use it, you cannot be hurt by anything. And it has no recovery. As you can see, I am not being penalized for hitting the ground, so once you do this, you cannot be punished in any way. It also can cross up, it can pass cleanly through the opponent, allowing you to go for mix-ups and all sorts of shenanigans, and it does not count as an air action. You are allowed to go into flight, teleport dash, and then still jump or super dash. Before Zamasu had this move, his flight mode was basically kind of like a useless gimmick, because the moment the opponent saw you in flight mode, they would just super dash into you. But now that you have this, you have a way of preventing yourself from being super dashed. I still honestly can't believe this move works the way it does. It is pretty much the best move in his entire kit now. Next up, let's talk about his flight slicers. So pressing L, M, or H during flight will do one of his corresponding slicers. But most importantly, you can now angle it. So if you want to angle it forward, you just press it neutrally. If you want to angle it down forward, you just hold 3, hold down and forward. And then if you want to go up forward, you just hold that angle. So you can hit whatever angle you want. And best of all, it cancels into the dash. So if you do your slicer from flight, you can press forward or back and S, and it will immediately cancel into the dash. And yes, as you can see, it makes it plus on block. So anytime you make someone block a flight slicer, you are now plus. And if any of the flight versions hit, they instantly lead to a slide knockdown state. The medium version is very similar, as it goes much further, just like the grounded version. It can be angled, just like the light. The biggest difference here is that the flight medium version gives you a deep slide knockdown, meaning that it can be used to set up Hell Zone meterlessly. And just like always, the H version is a combination of the two. It comes out very fast, has great range, it's the same amount of plus frames on block as the other two. All three are plus 6, nothing there changes. But what does change is the hit reaction. If the flight mode version hits, you get a little ground bounce. The ground bounce is very fast and very brief, so if you hesitate even a little bit, you're not going to get the pickup. So keep an eye out for that. This move is also very tricky in the fact that you lose your slide knockdown, but you don't lose your smash. What that means is, once this move hits, you can still smash them, but you cannot get your slide knockdown. And of course, like all versions of the H Slicer, it does set up the Hell Zone. While in flight, your Air S becomes much more threatening, as you can now use it to kind of pester your opponent, because while you're shooting it, you can move in literally any direction. Make sure you keep in mind that it is unsafe on landing. This move does have landing recovery. Now, earlier in the guide, I mentioned how you don't have any invincible options to cancel into once you commit to the S. However, that's not true while you're in flight mode. While in flight, you can, in fact, cancel into the command dash. So if you go for the S and you react to the fact that your opponent chooses to super dash, you are able to teleport out. Next up is another big one. It is his Air 6S. This move is also very, very crazy and is heavily buffed. So the biggest difference right off the bat is there is no uncharged version. Simply pressing 6S causes the beam and strike to happen simultaneously, and as you can see, it's actually faster than the grounded version. Doing it during flight will make it come out in 20 frames, which is very, very fast for a beam. And it doesn't stop there. If you choose to teleport forward, as you can see, you are plus a whopping 13. So even at neutral, you have access to your own plus frames. And yes, it does cross up depending on the height. This is mostly height dependent. The closer you are to the ground, the more knockback the opponent has. So in most cases, if you do it low to the ground, you will not cross up, but you'll get that plus 14. And the last flight mode special move is 4L, which puts him into Wall of Light. Keep in mind though, activating Wall of Light will end your flight mode. So you have to get the muscle memory of always hitting S after the activation if you want to stay flying. And of course, as we mentioned before, if you ever want to end your flight mode, you simply just hit 4S. Now it's time to discuss his super moves, starting off with his level 1, Divine Wrath. This is a very powerful level 1. It does a lot of damage. However, there is a problem worth mentioning. It can be a little awkward to DHC. There's an example of a very basic combo into a DHC. I'm going to do a Ginyu combo here, and then I'm going to call Vegeta, and then I'm going to call Zamasu. So as you can see, Vegeta's super there outright missed. There's a few frames in there where Zamasu super slams him into the ground so deep that a lot of supers can either miss or just simply lose damage. The way to alleviate this is to just make sure when you DHC into Zamasu that you call him as late as possible in order to not interrupt any other super damage. Of course, Zamasu has his trademark Blades of Judgment, also known as the Hell Zone. This is basically an all-in-one super. It works as an Oki tool on the opponent's wake up. It works as, a combo extension. It works for just about everything. It is a huge part of his kit, and we will discuss that a little bit later in the tips and tricks section. Next up is Zamasu's level 3. Now, this level 3 has a lot of attributes to it. So on the plus side, it is tracking. So it will hit the opponent anywhere on screen as long as they are not currently behind you. However, it does have a few downsides. As you can see, first of all, it's a little bit lower on the damage end, coming in at 3,900, so it's pretty weak for a level 3. The other big weakness is the startup. So if you're directly in front of the opponent, it will hit in 17 frames, and if you are full screen, it will hit in 23. So what this means is you have to be pretty accurate with it overall. But at the same time, it is very good at punishing most special moves. Like, this is a level 3 that if you see any sort of uncancelable attack and your reactions are good enough, you can definitely tag it with this. Now let's go over his assists, starting with his A assist. For his A assist, he basically does his beam, and this is, in my opinion, his best assist by far. It comes out very fast. It has beam properties. It hits up very high, so it can catch opponents who are jumping back. In a recent patch, they buffed the block stun, so as you can see, it is now plus 30 on block. So this gives you a lot more pressure options for your other characters. And unlike a normal beam that is hard to combo off of, Zamasu has an amazing hit reaction on his beam, making it incredibly easy to run up and get a confirm. You have a very long time to visually see that they got hit, and you can literally dash across the whole screen and pick them up. His B assist, on the other hand, I'm not as fond of. It is a pretty standard close range lariat assist. The best aspect of it is it comes out incredibly fast at a whopping 20 frames, making it, almost as fast as an assist can even be. But as you can see, it does not travel very far, so you would need a very specific team build to utilize this assist. However, the block stun is decent. It's almost plus 30 on block, which is really good. And the hit stun is actually really great too. The opponent is held in place for a good amount of time, and you have a long time to convert this one as well. So it's pretty decent, but in my opinion, I don't see why you would choose it over the A. The A just has so much more utility, in my opinion. And then, of course, there is the C assist. Love them or hate them, C assists are still an option in the game, and Zamasu actually has one of the best ones. As you can see, even as an assist, it still travels through projectiles and keeps its tracking. It even goes through other assists. So if you have Zamasu on your team and you're looking for a powerful defensive assist, I honestly think this is one of the best in the game. So now that we've covered his entire kit, let's go ahead and move on to how to actually play him with some general tips and tricks about each aspect of the game. We'll go ahead and start with the neutral aspect. Honestly, with this character, neutral is whatever you want it to be. If you want to focus on, staying aggressive and rushing down, you can do that. If you want to focus on zoning, you can do that. This character really does have the tools to do both. So to start off with, his recommended neutral tools are 5S. His 5S, as we mentioned before, is a great button. It's so fast that it's very hard for the opponent to react to, and it will, in most cases, prevent them from even calling their assists. And as mentioned before, it layers so well with assists that you can prevent them from calling theirs while easily calling yours. If you don't have an assist up or you just don't feel like spending it, your 5S is also a great way to confirm your slicers. Let's say that you don't want to commit to a medium slicer because you don't know what your opponent's up to, you can always put a 5S in front of it. That way, if the opponent is hit by the 5S, your slicer will come out, and if they jump over it or if it whiffs, nothing will come out, leaving you safe. After the buffs, Wall of Light is now a really great option at neutral. It's not just something to use on Oki or in block strings, it is insanely good at neutral. If you're going to be moving around and, playing footsies with your opponent, there's no reason to not have a little bit of backup, because you would be surprised how often you're just moving in kind of close and the lightning happens to zap the opponent. Not to mention, you can easily go into flight mode from it, as we mentioned before. Flight mode is the key to Zamasu's neutral. All of his moves go into it. He can do all of his moves from it. You can bypass most of the assists in this game simply by flying. Most attacks are bypassed simply by flying. The ones that aren't, you can still use the teleport. It is the single most important tool in his kit, and it is the backbone of your neutral. Your Wall of Light and your slicers should all be used to go into flight. And when you're in flight, you just need to make sure you're mixing up your options. 6S into back teleport for zoning, 6S into forward teleport for pressure. Sneak in that EX slice for the plus frames and the cross-ups. Sneak, if you don't want to commit to anything, simply go into Wall of Light with flight. Be creative. There's literally no limit to what you can do with this character at neutral. That is literally the secret to his strength. Most people talk about his damage and how he just deletes your health bar, but one of his greatest strengths is how many options he has at neutral. It really is up to your imagination. Next up for general gameplay tips is block strings. So this is another area where Zamasu does very well, again due to how amazing his buttons are. You have a lot of options in this area. Now, I've mentioned pushback many times, so I wanted to show an example of that. So in a lot of cases, Zamasu's buttons are going to push the opponent so far away that even though you're negative, if they try to challenge, most times you'll be able to tag them before they can tag you. Now that we've covered his solo staggers, let's talk about what happens when you actually do have assists behind you. Putting assists behind Zamasu really lets you get creative on block because it opens up both his Wall of Light and flight setups. Let's go ahead and talk about the flight setups first. So as mentioned many times, the EX version into flight is plus. So using just about any assist, you can get a very good amount of plus frames to the point where you can lock the opponent down into all sorts of situations. The more plus on block the assist is, the more options you get. For the most part, this situation right here is pretty easy to achieve with just about any assist. Whether or not you can do more than that is going to require more blocks done, so it's good to experiment. But as long as you have an assist, you're pretty much guaranteed to get some form of flight mix. And there's pretty much too many options to even name, but some simple options are you can mix up between 1 overhead, 2, or of course the empty low. It really is up to you. And depending on the knockback, you can also just cancel the flight and go for a dash overhead or a dash empty low, depending. It's a little difficult to get the empty low without dashing mid-screen in most cases, but some assists will set you up for that. However, in the corner is where a lot of the mix-up comes in. When you're in the corner, there's pretty much no limit to what you can do. Just be creative and make sure you just keep mixing up your options. As long as your assist has even remotely good block stun, you can get your empty low to be gapless. Let's go through some examples of Wall of Light with assist. This is also a cornerstone of Zamasu's up-close pressure, so basically, again, just about any assist, as long as it has even decent block stun, will allow you to set up your Wall of Light. So basically, you're trading one assist for another. This is another avenue where you can get incredibly creative. Remember to keep in mind that the 5M will give you forward momentum, so it helps if you call your assist, use the 5M, and as you see, Zamasu slid forward there, so that's going to help you continue your pressure versus if you're way back here, it's going to be a lot more difficult to actually get that pressure. So it's good to usually use 5M so that you're left very close to the opponent mid-screen. In the corner, you don't have to worry as much, but mid-screen, make sure you use that 5M. So a simple Wall of Light string I would recommend to get started is 2L, 5LL. And then from there, you can either do 6M or 2M. So this or this. So if you go for the 2M ender, it sets you up for your lightning to pop as soon as your animation is done, which gives you a lot of plus frames. The alternate version, as I said, is to end it with a 6M instead. With this route, you get an overhead, and even if they block it, you are still plus, so you get your turn. And better yet, if they don't block it, you can combo off of it solo. You can also do this with 4LL, 5M if you want to mix things up. Both options work the exact same way as the last two situations. And if you feel like you've earned your opponent's respect, you can always sneak in a Dragon Rush. Wall of Light is another area where you can just get extremely creative. There's just so many different ways you can utilize this move. And of course, we can't end this section without talking about the tick throw. The tick throw has a lot of different routes to set it up with. And if you're unfamiliar, the tick throw is basically the act of setting up the opponent to get grabbed by your auto combo. And it looks a little something like this. That variation was you do an IAD and then you do 5M, 5L in the air. And then you want to do 2L, 5LL, and then slightly pause, and then finish your auto combo. Now, some things to note about the tick throw. While it is like a good way to open up the opponent, keep in mind that you are incredibly vulnerable during this, because as you saw for a few frames there before you grab them, the opponent is just standing there. They're not in any block stun, as we mentioned before. So if they are inclined to mash, you're guaranteed to get hit, so you have to be very careful. Now, word of caution about Wall of Light, it's very important that you lab out your strings and know what you're doing when it comes to using Wall of Light, because it can get in the way of your buttons, meaning that you can make yourself very unsafe depending on when you do your actions. As you see right there, my universal overhead became -11, which is very punishable. So Wall of Light is not something you should just, equip and just start swinging wildly. Make sure you sit down and really learn your strings and learn what's actually going to get you plus frames versus what could potentially get you killed. And now it's time to talk about Zamasu's Oki game. So as we went over before, Zamasu's staple B&B is to usually just end his combo with his medium slicer in the air. It's either medium slicer in the air or it is air 2H. Both of these options are special cancelable. So when you end any of your combos with the air slicer, simply hold S to go into flight mode, and due to the deep slide animation, you can always get directly on top of the opponent as they're getting up. So at that point, you have the option of continuing your pressure in flight or baiting their wake up. If you want to continue your pressure, the best move to use is your 6S. Because of the fact that it's so plus, you're basically going to have them wake up into plus frames, usually around plus 15. And 9 times out of 10, when you use this route, they're going to end up in the corner. And when they're in the corner, your 6S becomes much more deadly because now you get your plus frames on top of the fact that they're no longer pushed back. So once they block this, you can do a falling button, you can do a dash check, you can do an empty low. You just have so many options, and this is all after you just got done doing a combo. So it's very easy to stay on top of people with Zamasu nowadays. And again, this is possible from his 2H as well. And due to the speed of his flight, it's very easy to bait out reversals. And if you want to layer this even further, you can by canceling into Wall of Light on knockdown. You can cancel into Wall of Light and then cancel that into flight. So you are now in a situation where they have to hold multiple plus frames. And of course, it doesn't stop there. He has his patented trademark Blades of Judgment, and this is another one of his best options for dealing with wake-up shenanigans. And again, this is another situation where you can get very creative with this character. A setup that I like to do that bypasses most options, including raw tag, is to do Wall of Light and hold S. That way you go into flight mode, and then you want to do a charged beam. This will usually cover just about any option that's not a reversal. If they try to reflect mash, they'll get hit. If they try to reflect raw tag, they'll get hit. And if they just block, you're incredibly plus. And of course, there is my favorite option if you've ever seen me play, the Vanish cross-up. So once you put out the Blades of Judgment, there is a small window in there before the blades actually hit where you can vanish. And if you time your vanish to hit in that small window, it will actually cross up the opponent's input, making them walk into the Hell Zone and get hit instead of actually having their reflect come out. This is incredibly good when you feel like you have a read on an opponent who is going to try to reflect, or if your opponent keeps trying to reflect your Hell Zone, this is a great option to mix them up. Usually once you hit your opponent with this once or twice, they're actually going to start blocking the Hell Zone, which leaves you with many, many options to go for mix after that. And the best part is if you go for the Vanish mix and they actually do block it, that's okay because you're still plus and you now get a 4-way corner mix. And lastly, let's talk about Zamasu and team building. Whether you want to play him rushdown or keep away, it's still good to have one assist that goes well with his flight mode and one assist that goes well with his general up-close pressure. It really just depends on what you're looking for on your team and what kind of role you're looking for Zamasu to fulfill, whether that's defensive or straight up mix. In case you're having trouble deciding on a teammate, I do have some recommendations. Baby is actually one of Zamasu's best partners. Baby's a 6H, lets Zamasu do some crazy combos slash setups, and his B assist is great for flight success and just generally Zamasu's combo routes. Same thing for Janemba. Janemba is an amazing partner for him. Like, their tools pretty much go hand in hand. As much as I hate to admit it, Lab Coat, she is a very good teammate for him. Her A assist is very good for his combos and his general neutral game. Beers has been proven time and time again to have very, very high synergy with Zamasu. Bardock is a popular choice due to his B assist having so much block stun and setting up Zamasu for so many different kinds of mix-ups. And same thing with Kid Buu. And realistically, you can add Zamasu to just about any team as long as there's not another hugely meter-dependent character on that team. Very meter-dependent, so as long as your team can build meter, he's very good at spending it. And due to that fact, I usually recommend Zamasu be in the mid position because you want a character on point who's going to build up a lot of meter so that he can come in and start spending it. You can run him on point, and he is effective on point. However, I feel he's much more effective when he actually has bar to spend, so you can go for those EXs, you can go for, you know, as many hell zones as you want. You know, you can do all those things, but at round start, if he has no meter, a lot of what's good about his kit is not going to be on the table. When I say Zamasu is much better with meter, a lot of people say everyone's better with meter, but the difference is Zamasu's combos do not build meter. Like, they build barely any in most cases, and alone he builds basically nothing, which is much different from, like, you know, a Vegito or a Gogeta, you know, characters like that who, like, you know, Lab Coat, who just, the moment they hit you, you know, they're building tons of bar to spend on you, whereas Zamasu, he is the polar opposite. Like, he can spend it like crazy, but he cannot build it, which is why I would recommend you put him in the middle, because I feel like in the middle, that maximizes his toolkit, and you're going to get the most out of his character. And with that, we have at last covered everything you need to know about how to play Zamasu. This guide really was a long time coming, so I wanted to pack it with as much information as I could. Again, I was not able to include combos in this one just due to the fact of just how much there was to talk about with his kit. So the next guide coming very, very soon will be how to do his combos in basically every situation. We're going to go pretty in depth into that one about how to do the Wall of Light combos and all of the Hell Zone routes and all that good stuff. So keep an eye out for that. That one's still coming. But hopefully with this one, you've got a better understanding of like what to do with this character and how to play him, because Zamasu is a very, very fun character who just requires a little bit of, you know, extra lab work, a little bit of extra finesse, but once you put in that time, he really will pay it back tenfold. And that's gonna do it for me, guys. Thanks a lot. I hope this was helpful. If you still have some questions, or maybe I forgot something, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll definitely get back to you as soon as I can. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the combo guide coming up soon. And if this guide was helpful, please feel free to leave a like. It really does help. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.